welcome to fmtraining.tv. My name is Margaret. I'll be your broadcast engineer for today. I'm here at the wonderful Leland Long. Leland has been very gracious to be with us these last, frankly, several weeks as a trainer on JSON, JavaScript, and a variety of other little things that you can incorporate into FileMaker. So we're delighted to have him on. Seriously, he's been fantastic. Thank you very much, Leland, for doing this. We greatly appreciate it.
Welcome.
Let's talk about our schedule for today. So today we're doing a variety of topics: WebViewer, data URI, FMP Protocol versus Snapshot link, some other stuff that Leland has for us. Leland, what are we doing today?
Well, let me share screen. Data URL and FMP Protocol. I will try to make it exciting. It's pretty dull and boring entertainment value, but I did send you the link to the GitHub page that contains this demo file. You can pass that along to all of our faithful attendees. We will start to discuss this awesome looking Cody looking stuff on the screen because oh boy does it look fun. So two different topics today we're going to try to squeeze down into one. They're somewhat related and somewhat completely unrelated. You take your pick. Roll the dice. So neither one of these have anything to do with FileMaker schema. This has nothing to do with scripting. This has nothing to do with data modeling or table structure or layout design. But this is some extra data that in previous classes I've kind of skimmed over a little bit. Might have used it a little bit, might have mentioned it, and today we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive. So without further ado, let's jump into our first one, which is our data URL. What the heck is that? Well, from online documentation that I copied and pasted this from, data URLs are prefixed with scheme, allow content creators to embed small files inline in documents. What does that mean? Well, if you recall from last week's class, matter of fact, while I'm talking, if I just bring up the file, if I can find it, well, maybe not. The file that we looked at last week where we did some JavaScript indicators, we did some animated meters or graphs. You'll recall at the very end of that, I showed you how to take some basic FileMaker layout elements and superimpose them over the animated meter. And then I dropped that into the WebViewer. And the way that I did that is I used this data URL. So FileMaker's WebViewer is unlike a standard web page that can be developed by anybody that knows how to develop web pages. Web pages, whenever there's an image or an animated GIF or a video or a sound file, pretty much anything that's not HTML code is all stored externally and it has to be referenced as a source file. And that usually sits on disk somewhere. FileMaker's WebViewer cannot do that. You can't access, for instance, a movie file sitting on disk inside your WebViewer using standard HTML code to import or show videos. But you can use a data URL. And a data URL allows you, like it says here, to take small files, kind of emphasis on the small, I mean not too small. Basically, if you're looking at a meg in size or less, you'll probably be fine. Matter of fact, each browser has its own limits as far as what it can use. I think Safari is in the 2 gig range, but you know, obviously you're not going to store a 2-hour full frame video inside there inline inside your document. So that's one of the things that this allows you to do, and we'll see examples here a little bit. Let's move on. The data URL is composed of 4 different parts, and so you can see them here or up here. The first part is the prefix data with a colon. Then after that, you have your MIME type. Now there is a default. If you leave that out, the square brackets, I believe, shows that that's optional. If you leave that out, I think it's going to default to text. So you can insert just raw text in here if that's what you wish to do. And base 64 is also an option. And if so, you have to have the semicolon, then the phrase base 64, and then a comma after it. And then after that is your raw encoded data. And it actually doesn't have to be encoded. We'll see examples of that. So that's the 4 basic parts. So let's start off with what's this meta type? Well, that's the MIME type. And if you're not a web developer, that might not sound familiar. So I believe I have a page up here somewhere. I'll rotate through all these. No, I don't. Let me go ahead and bring it up really quick because I had it up earlier. Am I going to be able to find this quickly? MIME types, where I think I'll just have to do a Google search. So MIME types is a common element in HTML. So here's our link, common MIME types. And this gives you an example of what those MIME types are. Now, those kind of typically match the 3-digit extension on your file, right? So if you're looking for an MP3, or you're looking for a JPEG, or you're looking for a GIF, those are going to be your file extension types, which usually determines what the file is, right? A JPEG tells you what type of file it is. And then in this last column, it shows you the MIME type that is used to tell the browser what to do with the data. So it helps the browser understand what you're giving it, because you can give it pretty much anything, and it's going to try to render that, and it's going to try based upon what you tell it the MIME type is. So the secret of which one to use, find a list like this, do a search for the particular one that you're looking for, and just copy and paste the MIME type right over into that section right there, and you're good to go. So it's pretty straightforward. And I did put that reference right here in that demo file. So there's that web page we were just looking at, if you want to reference that later. Last but not least, if the data contains reserved characters, kind of weird stuff like new line characters and other non-printing characters, those have to be URL encoded. So you're already familiar with that if you've already tried to do any URL work as far as providing a URL or hand typing in a URL. You know things like spaces are not allowed, and you know that a slash character is going to designate a path separator, delimiter, and so forth. Okay. I'm not going to stop for questions at this point. If there are any, I'll move over because the next page is a few more rules with some examples. Let's look at some examples. So I have 3 here on the screen. And the first one is about as simple as it gets. And you'll notice it's missing that optional MIME type, and it's missing that optional base 64. And it just says data : comma, and then the raw text. And you'll notice that even though it looks like it's encoded, FileMaker did not render it in the WebViewer. By the way, this section on the left is a WebViewer. If I go into layout mode, here's our 3 WebViewers. And if you look at the define WebViewer, I've just got that data URL right straight in here inside double quotes. You don't have to turn any of these check marks on. They can be on or off, doesn't matter. So there's 3 of those here on the screen. That's what you're looking at. And so this first example, it literally took the text, not encoded at all, and just plopped it right there as data. So pretty boring, probably you would never want to use that, but at least it helps you understand how to use this data URL as far as what's required, what's acceptable, and what it looks like, and why the heck you would want to use it. So this first one is a very poor example because you would never want to use it, right? It just doesn't make any sense. The second one, however, gets a little bit more interesting. And this one is a little bit more along the lines of what the next 2 are along the lines of something you might purposely do for one point or another. So this first one is plain text, MIME type. It is base 64 encoded. And here's what the base 64 code looks like. We look in layout mode. It's replicated right here. It's exactly what it looks like. Now you notice does because it's in FileMaker, it has to be inside double quotes because the entire thing is treated as text or string. So it's not a field, it's not a reference to anything FileMaker-ish, no scheme or nothing, it's just a raw string inside quotes with no spaces at all. And what does it render like? Well, it renders right there. It renders hello, comma, world, exclamation point. So how did it do that? How is this turning into that? Well, if you don't fully understand the concept of base 64 or you've never seen it before, let's have FileMaker show us exactly what that means. If I take just that encoded text and I copy it and bring it into our data viewer, go to the watch section, add a new one. Let's put this in FileMaker's built-in function, base 64 decode. And that's going to accept text, so I'm going to put in my double set of quotes. And inside there, I'm going to paste in what we did there. So what that means is that this garbly goop text is base 64, and when it's decoded, this is what it decodes into. Now that should make sense, right? Now you're seeing how base 64 code that looks like gibberish, how that converts into something that the browser is going to render. And that's what this data URL's purpose is. So you can put things in line that normally you couldn't put. Things in line like binary data, which is things like images, sounds, various other things. This last example down here is the same exact concept. It's still text. Now I did have a /HTML here, and I'm not sure if that's required, but this I wanted to see if I could render it as HTML and not just raw text. So I used the MIME type text /HTML. It's still base 64 encoded, but this time it's a little bit more data, right? And that's what it rendered. And here's what that base 64 code is actually representing, is this right here. And as you can see, that's valid HTML code. And so after the base 64 code is decoded into this, then the browser can understand HTML. That's what it's best at, right? And so browse mode, that's what it renders. So 3 different pure examples, real simple examples of how to use the data URL. But it's at this point, I know you're not sold yet. At this point, I know you're saying, okay, that's intellectual, that's theoretical, that's wonderful. I can pass a test with this, no problem. But why would I really use it? I wouldn't use it in any of these examples, and that's correct. So I did provide a few more examples. Let's look at the first one. The first one is the infamous JPEG image. I say infamous because it's so common, right? I believe everybody out there has heard of it. If you don't know what a JPEG image is, you're probably not watching this show. So that's why I said infamous. So over here on the right, I have a container. In fact, let's look at define database even. So here I have an image, it's a container, and I have an encoded image, which is a calculation, which base encodes that image, not decodes it. I'm turning that image into base 64 gobbledygook code, right? So it's a calculation, so it's automatically going to do that as soon as there's an image sitting inside the container. So that's what I've done here. I've moved this image inside this container, and this calculation is FileMaker's calculation of the base 64 code of that image. So then what I do over here in my web browser is I use that data URL with the MIME type image /JPEG, base 64 encode it, and I include this encoded code. Now let's look in the WebViewer and see what I did here. So this time, here's the string. Whoops, come on. Here's the string, same as we've seen before, but now I've added some FileMaker elements. I've added the contents of a FileMaker field. Which field? That encoded image calculation that we were just looking at in defined database. So if you're more comfortable with seeing it here in a standard calculation dialog, that's what it looks like. Okay, so I'm taking the basic string header and I'm adding the encoded data to it. And what do we get as a result? The browser renders this base 64 encoded stuff into this image. Now, you can't, in FileMaker, put an image inside of a WebViewer without doing it this way. So if you've ever wanted an image in a WebViewer, this is how you can go about doing it, hence the importance of the data URL. So this is my first example of a use case that you might use it, and this is exactly what we did last week in order to put those little white ruler marks on top of our animated meter for last week's JavaScript indicator. This is exactly what I did to do. It's the exact same thing. Okay. One more example, and this one, I remember years ago wondering, oh, it would be really cool to put an animated GIF in FileMaker, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. And finally, I did figure out how to do it, and this is how you do it. If I move to the next record, there it is right there. So you can't normally have an animated anything in FileMaker, but yet here's an animated GIF inside FileMaker. And we use the data URL to do it. All I did was take an existing GIF image out there, drop it in here. FileMaker encoded it right here, and I threw it into the WebViewer the same way we've done previously, and there's the result. Pretty snifty. And that is the end of my presentation for data URL. Now it's time for the million questions pouring in.
Decoded base 64 is bigger than the coded one, question mark.
It's possible. I think I read some references out there with some developers debating back and forth which way to do it, which way's best, because which one's smaller, which one's bigger. But in my humble opinion, that argument is a null point for FileMaker developers because we're not doing it for efficiency's sake. We're doing it so that we can even do it at all. We only have, as far as I know, we only have one option to get content like this inside of a WebViewer. And so you can debate all day long whether or not there's another method that might be more efficient. But if you can't do it in FileMaker, it's kind of a moot point, right? So base 64 is the way to go if you want to insert images and animated images. Now, I did try to do a sound file. Needless to say, I had to try that, but I was not having any success. So my favorite way of doing sound in FileMaker is still the JavaScript way that we learned back in JavaScript 101. Nice, quick, easy to do. Can fully control it from code. You don't have to deal with. Now, FileMaker obviously can do a sound file all by itself in a container. You can turn on and off the controls. You can do all of that. That's been built into FileMaker for quite some time. But when it comes to doing it the way that I wanted to, which is no controls, to be able to just ping a sound whenever I wanted to and not have to have it manually controlled, all of that was magically done in JavaScript. So go back and see JavaScript 101 if that piques your interest. And also I have a plugin, not a plugin, an add-on out there called Async Sounds. You may or may not have provided a link for that for a previous class, but if not, Pentagon FM is the source for all of my add-ons, including that one, Async Sounds, 2 words. And if you're on my GitHub page, it's there as well as a repo.
Question from Twitch: is the encoding image parentheses text sealer than the original picture?
I wonder if they meant to be smaller. Again, if we're talking file size or content size, I'm not entirely sure. Again, GIF and JPEG are both compression algorithms. Base64 is not compressed at all, I don't believe. So I would presume intellectually, without doing any research whatsoever, my educated guess would be that Base64 is going to be larger in size than JPEG or PNG or GIF, because those are all compressed formats. So this is not doing any compression whatsoever. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. So it's probably always going to be bigger if that answers the question. Does the image move as if it's a video? Well, a video is very different from an animated GIF, right? An animated GIF is simply a series of static images that are just played one right after the other to simulate animation, where a video is kind of similar, but a lot different. So, I mean, it's kind of 2 different technologies. Animated GIFs have been around for a very long time. They're compressed. They take a very small footprint, very small file size, where a movie is much larger, even in compressed states. So, and it includes, animated GIFs do not include sounds, where video can, and most often does. So,
Pavel did mean smaller, so.
Good, okay. So hopefully I answered that question adequately. And if the questions are slowing down, we'll move on to the next short topic, which is the FMP protocol. And with that, I will move on to FMP protocol. We can always go back to that if questions come in, no problem.
Yep.
All right, FMP protocol. What am I talking about? What is it and why do I want it? It's a URL. That's all it is. So it's like a link, and you can use it as a link. Any place that you would normally have a link, you can use this in place of it, but it's meant specifically to open and run a FileMaker database and or a script tied to that database. That's its purpose. So I think in your description of this class, you included the word snapshot link. So snapshot link is kind of similar, but it actually has even more power. A snapshot link is a specific found set on a layout in a specific table, in a specific database. It's a file, and you can send that file to anyone. They can double click on it, and if they have the applicable version of FileMaker, compatible version of FileMaker on their machine, they can open that snapshot link, and it will open that database. It will go to a specific layout that's tied to a specific table, and it will have a specific found set, and it's just like a snapshot in time of what you're staring at, and you go share that with somebody else without having to tell them how to replicate what you did in order to get there. So that's the snapshot link. An FMP protocol is nowhere near as complicated or powerful as that. It's simply a link, just like an HTTP link. If you type in an email, http://www.fmtraining.com, that link will be rendered typically on the recipient of your email, that they can click on that and it opens up their browser and takes them to fmtraining.com, right? So everybody's familiar with the concept of a link. That's what this FMP protocol is. It's a link. But the protocol is not HTTP. The protocol is FMP or FMP XX, where XX is the version number if you have more than one installed, if you want to be specific for a version to have launched. So what is its purpose? The purpose of the link is kind of like a snapshot link, but it can only just open the database and or run a script. So that's what it's limited to. It's not going to do a found set. It's not going to go to a specific layout, unless in the script you do that. So you can replicate the functionality of a snapshot link using an FMP protocol. It would just be a few extra steps. And both of them require the recipient to have FileMaker Pro installed on their machine that they use the link for. So what is the number one reason why I personally have used the FMP protocol? Here's my answer. Using Slack or Teams, we do a lot of automated notifications to where FileMaker is running, it's doing things, and it sends an automated notification to Slack or Teams to a specific channel, to a specific individual. Inside that message, you can include an FMP protocol worded link. And if they click on that link, it will do what you want it to do. So that's the big reason why I use it. That's a really good use case scenario as far as when you would want to use this, because you can include this link in an email, in an automated message. Any place that you can use a link, you can use this type of link instead of HTTP, which is the most common link out there. Okay, so now that we know kind of maybe why we might want to use it, what does it look like and how do we use it? All right, so FileMaker's help screen dictates this. It says with a URL, you can start a client and open a shared or local file or run a script in a file. So that's FileMaker's Claris's official wording on exactly what this FMP protocol is. So here's the complete format of the URL, and everything inside curly braces is optional. So we'll skip that boring part and just get down to some of the definition of what some of this stuff means. First off, it starts off with a scheme. The reason why they've done that is because Claris has two options now for their scheme for this protocol. And one is to start off with the scheme of Claris, and the other one is to start off with FMP or FMP XX. So there used to only be one, but now that Claris is, the Claris product line is being built at the same time and released at the same time as FMP. Now there's two schemes to use depending upon which platform you're currently using. So if you use just the FMP protocol like you see in this example up here, then if there's multiple installations on the machine that's being used, that this link is being activated on, it's going to use the last installed version of the application. That's going to be the default. So if you want to specify between, for instance, FileMaker 18 or 19 or 20, you're going to need to change the XX to be the applicable number. And that way it'll focus on that specific version only. I'll get to questions here in a minute. Let's move on to the next page, which has a few more rules and a few examples. And then I'll show you a live example. So here's some gotchas, some notes to consider. Again, all of this is in FileMaker's help, but we'll cover this kind of one by one to hopefully answer questions before they're even asked. So in order for the URL to run a script, in the extended privilege set in the security settings of the user's account that's being used, the FM URL script extended privilege set has to be enabled. So that's probably off by default. You would have to turn that on, and then running a script will work with this link. Otherwise, it will quietly fail with an error code. The next gotcha is that to allow hosted apps to be opened using in either of the schemes, the user must click open if prompted. And I'll tell you that the reason why it says that is because in the last couple of years, security for things like Safari's browser has changed, so that if you try to open something like what we're trying to do here, security is going to bypass that and prompt the user with a pop-up dialog, and it will stop. It will not do anything unless the user actually clicks manually the open button to continue to allow, because that's a security hole. That could automate some things that could be nasty. So they've blocked that by forcing a manual okay acknowledgement that you really do want this FMP to open up a file and prompt a script. So that stops all the bad guys from doing bad things. The next gotcha is special characters. So for instance, if your database name has spaces in it, for instance, or slashes or other non-friendly URL characters, then it has to be URL encoded. So if you look down here at this first example here, you can see my percentage sign 20 addresses. If you're familiar with URL encoding, you would know that %20, which is hexadecimal, by the way, it's not 20, is the URL encoded value of a space. So that would be my space addresses would be the title of your database that you're trying to open. And you can use FileMaker's built-in Git as URL encoded function in order to take any existing URL and safely encode it properly. It'll do all the work for you. Okay. So that's it for notes, the gotchas. Here's one more definition to help specify things. The address of the file that you're trying to open. Obviously, the first one is kind of an obvious one. You have to give the proper IP address or the DNS name of the host. For example, sales.example.com, if that's your host. If you want to specify the file in a documents folder, the special character tilde, that is the shift backtick right above your tab key in the upper left of your keyboard below the escape key. That tilde sign, if you use it like in this second example down here, that would mean inside the documents folder, inside of a clients folder inside of that. Actually, the clients might be the name of the database. So you would have documents and then just clients database sitting in there in the root of the documents folder. And last but not least, the $sign specifies a file that is already open. So I suppose, I haven't tested this, but I suppose if you tried to do that, if the file was not open, it would either fail or give an error message or something. So you would have to specify the full path in order to open it, launch it, run the optional script. Here's 4 examples. The first one we've already covered, which opens up a hosted database called MySpace addresses out there on the interwebs. The second option is a document folder database called clients, and this runs a script called list clients. Third example is specific to the version 20 of FileMaker Pro, and it passes in an account and a password. And then here is the name of the host. Then you have a slash and the pathway to the database that's hosted. And the last example is FMP with a hosted file named clients with a script called list clients and a script parameter called top clients and an option 3, which would look at FileMaker's documentation for that. That has to do with whether or not this script, when it's triggered, is going to wait for other scripts, whether it's going to interrupt them, so on and so forth. And last but not least, a $sign number to list. I'm not sure what that is. That's interesting. And $sign number to list equals 10. Again, look at documentation. That's straight where these examples came from. So that last one is a really complicated one, probably not one that you need to worry about. But look at documentation in case you're interested in what that means. So with that, Richard has showed up. He's raised his hand. He's ready to start learning. And I'm ready to tell him, oh, class is over. Have a nice day.
Class is over. It's all done, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Let's see.
How are we doing on questions? Let's see. Well, I think we already covered those 2 that you posted on Discord. David Angel's got a new one.
Oh,
yes,
David.
he does. You think that the metadata in WebViewer could bring a record image from a URL that isn't in the same FM server? The question is because FM Cloud has limited space.
Boy, that's
he's talking about what base 64, right? Is that what you're? Well, okay, back up. So he's talking about the DAPI limitations. Is that what she's talking about? DAPI limitations from the FileMaker server? Is that what David's asking about? Because that sounds like a question that we might want to repeat tomorrow with Jacob Taylor.
I think with web viewers in general, you're going to have a problem with data that's on a different FM web server because of cross-origin restrictions.
Yeah, cores. Yeah.
So even if that's technically feasible on a theoretical level, you're probably going to be blocked by cores simply because you're in a web viewer.
Yeah, tomorrow we're doing an open Q&A with me and Jacob Taylor on the new FileMaker 23 was just updated yesterday, the day before. And so there's a new update out for that, plus the server update. So we're going to be going open Q&A tomorrow with server, plus talking about FileMaker 20. I keep telling Rick, your version needs the name you're naming, so it needs to be version 23, right? So we talk the same, but it's version 20.1.2. So it's release or major release 1, but it's .2 on the bug release. So
that's kind of a good argument between software engineers and sales people, sales and marketing people. Sales and marketing, it's got to be 23, and engineers are like, no, it cannot jump from 19 to 23. It's got to be 20.
Yeah. So there was an update on that. We're going to be talking about that tomorrow. There continues to be people about questions about trying to save their bandwidth usage. Just came up last week with you, Leland. All right. So if you're doing, you're pushing data out of FileMaker and Amazon's charging you, or you're pushing data out of the data API, FileMaker's charging you, right? Really? So, but they don't charge you for images, containers, right? So that's the rub. So Someone was asking about text fields, number fields, all those other fields are you're billed for that, but almost rarely do you really run out of room on the data API. Their numbers on that are very generous. I've never run out of that. You haven't run out of that. So when you buy if you buy a 5-pack of FileMaker, you get so many gigabytes of or terabytes of data. And then if you buy a 10-pack or 20-pack or a site license or a 100-seat license, then the amount of corresponding data API data that you're allowed to use goes up appropriately, right? So we almost never run out of it. Even though I'm driving the website on fmtrain.tv with the update the next 6 days, right? We see that every time everyone loads that deducts against what Claris will allow me to do. And if we use it all up, I have to cut a check and give them more money. We've never run out of that. But they don't bill for images that are pushed out of containers. So
question from Ken, probably only remotely related to today's topic, but can you pass a username/password and a link to a WebDirect file?
I think I tried that years ago. I don't remember if I succeeded or completely failed. Richard, have you been exposed to that?
The rub is that we're back to this issue of having a plain text security code, right? Mm-hmm. So, and in general, that's frowned upon, right? So you have to be able to log on as a guest, but guest access is not enabled if you're using FileMaker Cloud, right? They don't want people to log into databases on a Apple run or managed server. So if you use FileMaker Cloud, it's an Apple/Claris server. They don't want guest access on that at any point. But you could do guest access on that, have it run a script. The script runs as an administrator, and then it logs you in with higher level credentials per a script. You could weasel something like that, I think, at least if you roll your own server, FileMaker server. I think you could get away with that. Because that's one of the things people do is there's a script step that will re-log you in at a different credential level, up or down, right? And you could start someone with guest access, have an auto run a script as part of that login, maybe the startup script. And then it, under certain conditions, it sees that this person is who they should be or whatever, and it runs a script step with full administrative that logs the person at a higher level, right? So that can be useful. Once again, your mileage may vary on that.
A little work.
Yeah, that's the problem is that leaves us stuck with either coding stuff by hand with PHP or DAPI, or you use what the WebDirect, and WebDirect is not a public-facing kind of thing. It's not a public-facing website, and people want to use it that way, and Claris doesn't intend for it to be used that way, which causes problems. So all the users who are using WebDirect are supposed to be known people with a username password, right? So
Scott Kane had a good question, which is whether or not I've worked with data tables or any of the charting libraries. The answer is no, neither one. But that would probably be 2 future good content things, as long as I have some time to prepare for that. Create some data table examples, create some charting library examples, put those together.
We've had a number of questions about people wanting to do charting and stuff like that. People say, well, I want to build a dashboard, right? Everything you know on how to, I think Alex asked a question about dashboards. Nick has covered dashboards before. I've covered them in some of our training. It hasn't fundamentally changed. You have to identify a string of text that's important, stick it in a performant way in some sort of field or variable or something like that, and then tell it to chart it. And so you have to figure out what sort of what they call KPIs, key performance indicators that are important for your business, right? What's important? Money coming in, money going out, happy customers, whatever, delay, how long it takes for RCC to respond to our tech support questions, right? That kind of stuff. What are the key performance indicators? Then make a chart about it. That's educational. And I've done that personally. So that's a good one, but it's doing it with JavaScript just adds a, I don't know, in some ways it makes it more complicated, in some ways it makes it simpler, I think. So so you need to do some of that on your next project so you can come back and talk to us about it.
There you go.
Yeah, so the product that I like to use, if it's just 1 or 2 charts, I just use like a Google chart that's free. If I have a lot of charts, I will use something like Fusion Charts, which uses JavaScript. It used to be Flash-based, and et cetera, but that product has got some amazing charting in it. But you have to get the data in basically a virtual list or a value list. So it's 2 fields, and they're text fields, and they're kind of big and vertical, and you have data, carriage return, data, carriage return, data, carriage return, and then you tell it to chart against those X and Y coordinates or the donut chart or whatever you want to do. And you have to generate that in a reasonably good time, not waste people's time doing it. Maybe it's a robot that runs off after the fact or during the day or later at night. Maybe your charts are delayed in accuracy by 24 hours. You do them at night. And so then during the next day, you can see the charts, but they don't update in real time because maybe a lot of places doing real data analysis in real time, FileMaker is just not going to be able to chew through millions of records in real time to give you, like click a button and it updates it in a second and a half and you see the chart. That's where robots come in and SASE comes in and PSOS comes in. So I was training the new junior today, people on that. And that brings up a last question I want to throw out. I've been training some of our juniors on some basic scripting, and there are people out there, not necessarily people in this live stream. There are people who don't have a programming background, and they would benefit from beginning programming, like with an emphasis or focus on FileMaker, because you can get a lot done with it. But the question is there a benefit to any of you folks? Like, we spend time talking about what are variables, what are the main uses of variables, what are the outliers of things probably you don't want to do with variables, then talk about, procedures and this whole idea of, I know a lot of us, I learned to program in BASIC in 6th grade, and that started my company, right? And so I've been coding, and we do in FileMaker is not very different than that, right? It's got some specific database hooks and stuff into it, but programming is programming. It's a list of commands that are performed. But some people, that's a foreign concept to them because their entire technical background is responding to SMS messages on their iPhone and playing with Word and doing papers and stuff in school. They don't have any sort of programming background. And so, people come to me and I talk about variables like it's kind of an idea that they should loosely have in their head, and they're like, we have no idea what you're talking about. So the question is, how much of basic training would we go back and make available to people if you have thoughts?
And you and I both remember the days in FileMaker before set variable became around, and so we used
all global fields,
global fields,
which are not even really a thing, right? People say, why you call it a global field? Well, because in the old days you could have a text field, number field, date, time field, calculation, container field, or what it was called a picture field, and you actually had a global field was a kind of field. Now it's an option on the other fields. So it's a text field with global storage, right? But we still call it this old thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's like remote containers. It's what's a remote container? That's what Claris Engineering calls it, but marketing and the documentation calls it container with external storage, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, there's a lot of training possibilities, and if you folks have ideas about that, what you'd like to see, let me know. So next week is the idea would be probably the last Leland
event
for a while, I guess. So Leland
Q&A.
We were thinking about an open Q&A with JSON /
with everything we've ever covered. Yeah.
And then after that, I don't know, are we going to have you back again someday or not really?
Probably. I just need time to do some personal FileMaker development and React Native mobile development, get that cranked out, get to version 1, and then hopefully by then we'll have a nice little compiled list of future potential concepts or classes or content or something.
Just so someone can see what's coming up ahead, we have Jesse Barnum will be back on the show. We've got Kyle Williams coming back. I'm not entirely sure what he's doing, but he wanted to be part of the conversation. But you got Jesse Barnum. They've been in the middle of releasing all new updates to MirrorSync, new updates to Zulu, new updates for all sorts of stuff. So the idea is that going to be that he wants to come on the show and talk about updates on that end of the thing. That's great. Monkey Bread kicked out a brand new demo for me this morning that I'm going to evaluate and test it. But that's on digital document management aggregation for technically impaired people, right? Would be the nice way. But I think we're just calling it super glue for container fields, right? That kind of idea. So if
I'm technically impaired.
Impaired.
You mean it the other way. Oh, yeah. I thought you meant I'm just impaired technically.
Not you, the customer, right? So if you gave them 7 or 8 container fields and having them manage those and send the documents out to the customer, stuff like that. The issue is that I think if you have people who collect a lot of documents, and then what do they do with the documents? Well, we just want to give them to the customer or whatever. Then they need a button that rolls it all up, and you send a single combined email together. So the goal is to take pictures, PDFs, Word files, everything, glue it together, cross-platform into a single document, and it's a monkey bread moment. And Christian Schmidt just banged it out, and he knows that product better. I was talking to Claris about Christian, and they had very high regard for Christian Schmidt at Monkey Bread. So his stuff is essential. I think 360 works essential. I think Goya, Nick Orr at Goya and Base Elements folks, those are essential people. So essential products to the platform. If I didn't mention your product, I do apologize. But you should talk to me if you want me to promote your product, because I need to before I promote a product, I always use it. I never promote something I don't use. I've already done 2 hours of training today with people. Never mind all the awesome stuff that happens here. All right, we'll cut everyone loose. Topics, ideas, suggestions. Alex wrote, one of the Alexes wrote a very detailed, long wish list of all the stuff we did. But yeah, Jacob Taylor tomorrow, FileMaker server, and open Q&A on FileMaker server, plus all the latest bug fixes and updates. So if you tell FileMaker to update on your computer and you get Pro, whatever it is, it's FileMaker Pro 20.1.2, and it's build number 204. So 20.1.2.204, build number 204. So cool. So that means they've quite a few revisions and updates, because version 1 was build 35. So they've cut 170 different builds or versions of it potentially. And if you figure 3 or 4 builds per bug fix or whatever, they could have 30 or 40 bug fixes in there pretty easy. So anyway, that could be big. So we'll try to dig that list out and go do it tomorrow. All right.
Okay, that sounds like a plan to me.
Got a report of an individual up here who may be a FileMaker license. Well, it's potentially expired. Look at the back of that car right there. Looks like the FileMaker license has expired. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Sir, step out of the vehicle. Sir!